Hi, welcome back to another episode of the Barrel Proof Baseball Podcast. Today's guest is LC May from Clyde Mays. LC May, all right, as you're checking out this bottle, if you're watching this, LC May is the same May as what it says on this bottle. Clyde May was LC May's grandfather. So I enjoyed this conversation a lot because this isn't just somebody who is working for a brand. It's his grandfather's name on the bottle. So he's going to come from a place of having probably a deeper care factor and making sure that there's good whiskey being put into the bottle, and making sure that the story is being told accurately and being sold in the best way possible. I love the bourbon industry and its folklore, its stories, where it came from, the upbringing, the family recipes, all that stuff. But when you've got something that's actually related to the person whose name is on the bottle, that adds a little bit to it for them. So I was really excited about this conversation. I loved my chat with LC. I was a little upset that I had never tried Clyde Mays before, because I like this, and I really want to try some of their other bottles that they have. So check it out, learn a little bit more about Clyde Mays, learn a little bit more about LC and his role with the company and what he does. So check it out. I think you'll enjoy this one. All right. Thanks. Cheers. All right, I'm joined today by LC May from Clyde Mays. LC, thank you so much for jumping on here with me today. I really appreciate it.
Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right, so tell me a little bit about yourself, maybe how you got in with whiskey with Clyde Mays, your role with the brand as well. Let's hear a little bit about you.
Yeah, so I'm the national brand ambassador for Clyde May's whiskey. So basically, I go around and travel the country and do the interviews and the whiskey shows and kind of teach people how to enjoy this product. But I'm also the grandson of Clyde May, the original maker. So that's more or less how I got into the whiskey business. It's been in my family for my whole life, and I've been around whiskey making both legally and illegally, like what my grandfather was doing my entire life. And I've been in this role now since I graduated college in 2017. So a little over 4 years at this point, and having a great time and meeting a lot of people and drinking a lot of good whiskey and getting to tell the world my grandfather's story. So I have a lot of fun doing it.
I can imagine going around and meeting people, talking whiskey with people has got to be an enjoyable way to spend your days.
Absolutely. Obviously, my buddies mess around with me and they're like, yeah, you have the best job ever. You get to just drink whiskey all day and talk to people. And I'm like, well, yes, but every job comes with its fair share of stress and worry, but I'm very fortunate and blessed to be able to carry on my grandfather's legacy and talk about his whiskey and what makes his whiskey unique. And and to also get to travel to places I would have never imagined traveling to tell his story, since we're from such a small rural area in Alabama. It's really, sometimes I kind of have to take a step back and like, this is real. This is unbelievable.
Tell me, so I think people in general hear a lot about brand ambassadors and stuff like that. So is your job more or less to introduce people to like Clyde Mays? Is it to get it into bars or expand it into other stores, or like what is your primary role as the national brand ambassador?
For me, it's a little bit of everything you just mentioned. I have met ambassadors for larger companies where their role is more of getting in front of people and doing whiskey shows and bourbon dinners and things of that nature. And I've met, ones like myself where the company is a little bit smaller and you kind of have to wear many hats. So with my role, I do a lot. I kind of, the national brand ambassador title is kind of one big umbrella, and there's several things that fall under that umbrella. And for example, I'm based here in Alabama. I'm still 20 minutes from where I was born and raised, but I'm the assistant state manager here. So I'm doing things like making sure products getting delivered on time. And if there's any issues in the warehouse, taking care of that, handling new listings of products that come into the state. But then also I'm out nationally doing those whiskey dinners and the whiskey shows and interviews and bottle signings and meeting with accounts to either say, hey, thank you for carrying this product, or hey, let's talk about getting Clyde Mays in your account. So it's a little bit of everything, to say the least.
That doesn't sound terrible. Go out and meet
No,
people,
it's
and
not, trust me.
I believe it. Tell me a little bit about your grandfather. I saw he was a Bronze Star recipient, World War II veteran,
Right,
Purple
absolutely.
Heart. That's incredible. Tell me a little bit about him.
Yeah, so he's I have the coolest job ever, but I wouldn't have this job if it were not for Clyde May. I'm Lewis Clyde May the second. He was Lewis Clyde May. I'm Lewis Clyde May. So, I have the honor and the privilege of telling his story, but he really had the cool life. I mean, it was not easy at all, but he was actually born in the same area that I grew up in. I grew up 2 houses down from where he lived. It's out in the middle of nowhere in Southeast Alabama, outside of a very small town called Union Springs, Alabama. And as you mentioned, he fought in World War II. If you've ever seen or heard of the movie Hacksaw Ridge, which is based on the life of Desmond Doss, my grandfather and Desmond Doss were in the same infantry together. So, if you've seen that movie, you've seen the battle and the bloodshed that occurred, and Clyde May was in the thick of it. And Clyde May, even though we tell his story now and we kind of make him seem like a rock star, which he is, as I mentioned, he had a difficult life in a very rural area. When he was only 5 years old, his mother died. He never knew his father. He was raised by his grandparents, who were poor sharecroppers during the Great Depression. So he was motivated to, despite living in an area that doesn't have a whole lot to offer, he was going to do whatever it took to provide a comfortable life for his family, his growing family, which by the time it was all said and done was 8 children with my grandmother. So he was determined, and he never just made whiskey. He also always had a full-time job, whether it was farming or he was in the timber industry for a number of years. But around 1946, not long after he returned home from World War II, recovered from his injuries, he began making moonshine as a way to provide that extra source of income to provide for his family. But very quickly, it became more than just money to him, because he was a firm believer that everything he does, whether it's a batch of whiskey or building a fence for somebody, his reputation is attached to it. So he made sure to do whatever it took to make the very best product. And he built that reputation over many years. And that's why he became one of the more prominent moonshiner and whiskey makers, not only in Alabama, but really the Southeast. And it's worth noting, Clyde May never sold a legal bottle in his entire life. From 1946 until he died in 1990, every bottle of moonshine he distilled and every batch of whiskey he aged was illegal. And it wasn't until about 11 years after he died that one of his sons, my uncle, Kenny May was his name, he started the brand legally in 2001. So we've been legal now for roughly 20 years. However, the man that started all this never sold a legal bottle in his entire life.
I think so. I think it's always fun. I love the stories behind whiskey. I think it's really cool. And I think when you have that behind you, that, like, this was something, obviously going back into prohibition times. I mean, the whole thing with the legality of selling and making and transporting liquor, like you said, knowing that he never sold anything legally, that makes it pretty cool, and like the namesake carries on, but the fact that this man was making it illegally, I'm sorry, but that makes it really cool.
Oh, absolutely. It's part of our, legacy. It's part of the story. And what's really unique about it, in today's time, and this isn't a knock on anyone who's done this at all, because I'm a firm believer in the American dream, doing what you dream to do. However, when Clyde May was doing this, he didn't do it with the hopes and dreams of one day creating a legal brand. He was a very blue collar, very just a good old country boy. Basically, he didn't think that one day, like, hey, I'm gonna apply to get a license and do this legally. He was just doing it to provide for his family in an area that didn't have a whole lot to offer. And he actually did go to prison for 8 months for making whiskey in the early 1970s. So I said that he never sold a legal bottle in his life, and that's correct. But there was a brief 8-month period between 1946 and 1990 when he wasn't selling it at all, because he was in prison for making whiskey. So he was the real deal. There's no doubt about it. And it's even crazier for me because I grew up, my father was the youngest of the 8 children. His name is Billy May. He continued making moonshine illegally for many years after my grandfather died. He kind of felt it was his duty to carry on his father's name in that way. So I've been around whiskey making both illegally and illegally my entire life, even though obviously now I plan on carrying it on the legal way and breaking the family tradition of getting arrested for making whiskey. I've still, been around the block a time or two and, seeing how it's done both legally and illegally.
What was the moment or the determining factor or the reasoning behind your uncle deciding to, I guess, take it forward and turn it into a legal entity and, do this thing for real and not continue on the moonshining / illegal path?
Right. Kenny, my uncle Kenny, he was a firm believer in wanting to just tell the world the story of Clyde May, and never in a million years, I don't even think he has since passed, but I don't think he ever envisioned it getting as large as it has become today. And that's not to say that we're as big as some of your giants. We hope to get to that point one day, but he just wanted to tell the world his father's story. And part of that story isn't just like, hey, he was a moonshiner. More important than that was, here's what he did to make a unique and high quality whiskey. And that was kind of the tradition and legacy he wanted to carry on. And he probably had the same thought process as me was, I'm not going to I don't want to do it illegally. I want the world to know it and not have to worry about the law breathing down my neck. So I think that was his inspiration. It was a process he actually started in the late 1990s. And obviously these things don't happen overnight, but the first batches of Clyde May's whiskey were released to the masses, so to speak, in 2001.
So you've been going on for 20 years now.
Correct. And there, for a majority of our existence, I would say the first 12 or 13 years, we were very, very small. And when I say small, I mean a couple hundred cases in Alabama, maybe, and maybe a few extra cases in some bordering southern states. I don't think that even Kenny knew that one day, like, hey, this would blow up. But around 2013, we got honestly, you can have the best whiskey on earth, but if you don't have the right people behind it and get it in front of the right people, it's not going to go anywhere. And it was around 2013 that we finally got the right people behind it to help the product grow and kind of market it and get it out there. And now we're in all 50 states and about 7 countries. So, it's come along. So while we've been around since 2001, really this expansion and growth we've seen has really only been in the last 7 or so years.
It's incredible. I've heard from a number of people talking about, trying to get distribution into other states and just the legality perspective of, each state has their own regulations. They have their own, their rules, their laws in terms of, alcohol distribution. And so it seems like to get into all 50 states without being one of the big boys, without coming from, Heaven Hill or Buffalo Trace or something, seems like that's a tall task to take on.
Oh, absolutely. It's certainly a tall task. As you mentioned, every state is different. Of course, some states are very similar, but there's always one or two things that will make a state different from another. But especially when you factor in that you have open states and control states. For example, Alabama is a control state. I live in a control state, so I'm kind of having to deal with that a lot. And really and truly, first and foremost, the reason this brand has been able to get in those markets, despite how tough it's been at times, is because of the quality of the whiskey and, the name and the demand and the story behind it. However, I would be remiss if I didn't say, the people that we have working for our company as well are some of the most experienced industry veterans you could possibly find. And they've worked very hard to help this brand grow because they believe in it as well. We're not a big company, but we're kind of like a big family, so to speak. Even though they're not, I'm really the only May that's a day-to-day employee. All the other May family members are more behind the scenes, but kind of the pound the pavement guys, while they might not be May family members, you certainly would never know it the way they speak and promote and push this brand. They're just as passionate about it as you can possibly be. So that's a big reason why we've been able to grow.
Yeah, I think that's something that probably in a lot of industries is very difficult, especially, it's your family's name that's on that bottle. So no one's going to care probably the way that you are or in the same way.
Exactly.
So having people that do care, want to push it, want to expand it, want it to grow positively, I think is a huge deal. And having the right people in place is the only way to make those things happen. Do you feel like pushing forward, what kind of hurdles will you have to face to continue to grow the brand? Because again, like talking with people from, some craft distilleries and some that are significantly smaller than Clyde May's, they come out and everybody always says, look, we're not trying to compete with Buffalo Trace because we're not going to beat Buffalo Trace. We're not going to outsell Jim Beam. And that's clearly known. However, how do you, make room in that space for Clyde May's to continue to grow, to continue to be something that's highly sought after?
Absolutely. I think a big part of that and accomplishing that, the biggest challenge we face in this industry is the bourbon category has just taken off. I mean, tenfold. Certainly, I can't even imagine how much bigger it is now versus when we started just 20 years ago. The bourbon category has really taken off. So we're faced with the question, how do we stand out from a cluttered category? As you said, how do we, stand out? And as you mentioned as well, we're not trying to take down one of these giants. We're just trying to build our own name and legacy. And I think the most important thing, in my opinion, and as this is probably an easy answer, seems pretty simplistic, but it's the right answer. I know, no matter what you have, it doesn't matter who's on the bottle. It doesn't matter whose name is on the bottle. It doesn't matter about the backstory of the person on that bottle. You have to have that quality product in order to succeed, first and foremost. If a consumer goes to a store and they buy a bottle of Clyde May's or any brand for that matter, and they feel like they paid one more dollar than what it felt it was worth when they tasted it, then more than likely they will never buy it again. Yeah. So our goal is to produce a very premium, a super premium product, do it at a reasonable price. And then once you accomplish that quality and standard of excellence, then you start to build with your story and who you are and why you're unique. And I think if you get the right people out there, get in front of the right people, and just, word of mouth travels, and it'll get you a lot farther than people realize it'll get you. That's not to say that's the only answer. You know, once you get to a certain level, there's always something you got to do differently to take it to the next step. But first and foremost, and most importantly, you got to have high quality and great liquid, which Clyde Mays accomplishes, which is why we've grown the way we've grown.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the story is nice. And then I totally agree. I think if you try whiskey and you don't really like it, you're not going to buy it again and go, the whiskey sucks, but the story is great. I really like the story, so I'm going to drink that. Because in no other walk of life are you going to do that. I don't care if it's food or anything else.
Exactly.
So that makes perfect sense. Like, start with good whiskey, and the story becomes interesting enough to check out and then follow up with, and then it becomes a part of the good whiskey. Now, are you guys making your own, or is this something that you guys, get your recipe out to somewhere else that's produced elsewhere? What is that process like for you guys?
So currently our products are produced at MGP in Indiana. It is our proprietary blend and finishes. We'll kind of dive into that as we taste the individual product, and I'll explain what that finish is and why it's unique to us. But I mentioned earlier, Kenny May, my uncle, started this process in the late 1990s, and he spent 2 years trying to get a license to legally distill this whiskey in the state of Alabama. And at the time, legal distillation was not a thing. It was still illegal to distill any spirits. I'm talking vodka, gin, rum, whatever. You couldn't do it. And so essentially, one thing that I don't think my uncle gets enough credit for is, while everybody has a different opinion about sourcing and things like that, but Kenny May went out and had to find another distillery to make it to our specifications and our blends and our finishes. And that he was doing it at a time when people didn't even know what sourcing was. Everybody kind of made their own whiskey. So legal distillation did not occur in the state of Alabama until 2015. So for 14 years, no products were distilled legally here in the state. But once they did make it legal, we have now announced and have been in the process of planning and building our very own state-of-the-art distillery in Troy, Alabama, which is where I live today. So, we've finished the road work, all the infrastructure, we have the property, all the equipment's ordered. We will be breaking ground on the actual distillery here in the next couple months, and then it should be fully operational about 14 months from the time we break ground. So we plan to be fully operational in 2023. Of course, we have to let product age, so we'll continue to source using our blends, our finishes, and everything like that. But what we have done and what we've accomplished is based on the way we look at it is, it's our whiskey. We just don't own the equipment because the blends and the finishes they use for us are not used by any other brand in the United States. So it is a unique product to us.
I think the MGP thing is, I like having the conversation about MGP stuff because there's great whiskey coming from there, and people have a great idea of what they want to create, what they want to make. I think it's a great way to put your own whiskey into a bottle and sell it under your own brand. I think it's absolutely nothing wrong with it. I think there's a great story behind it. And so I think it's funny that people do have different feelings on the MGP stuff, but I'm not on the side of the people who are against it. I'm all in.
I think here I would even say in the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen kind of a changing tide. I felt like when I first got into this industry, I think sourcing was something that a lot of people kind of turned their nose up to. But with the growth of bourbon and whiskey and how many really good whiskeys and bourbons there are out there that are sourced, not just from MGP, but from other distilleries everywhere, I think people have slowly come around to the idea where it's okay, as long as you're doing it your way and it is truly your blend and how to your specifications, and there's nothing wrong with sourcing, especially in our case, because we had no choice. We were legally, had our hands tied and unable to do it here in Alabama, but we're finally bringing it home to Alabama. But until then, we'll continue to use our proprietary blends and finishes in our products.
So not to get too far ahead, but if you're opening in 23, is that something where like 25, you'd release a straight whiskey or a straight bourbon, or is that something that you'd like to age longer?
Our youngest product is 4 years old. So,
okay.
And we plan to keep it that way.
Okay.
We obviously, whenever you build a brand new distillery, people are really excited and want to get their hands on distillate from that distillery. And that's awesome. We want that too. But at the same time, it's what I was talking about earlier. That liquid has to meet a certain standard of excellence, especially if it's got my grandfather's name on it. He did whatever it took. He didn't cut corners to make a quality whiskey. So we're not going to feel the pressure of just rushing into it and saying, hey, it's 2 years old, let's throw it out there. We will begin bottling immediately, of course, at that facility. We are going to do something unique where we have some barrels that we had just laid down, and we're going to bring them to Alabama to finish aging. So early on, there will be some product that we can say was aged in Alabama and bottled in Alabama. But in terms of being able to say distilled, aged, bottled in Alabama, it'll be at least 4 years from the time we are up and running with the facility.
Makes sense. Yeah. That's got to be tough, man. I can't imagine as you lay those down and you're going, man, 4 years. All right. Like you lay another one down and you're like, all right, 4 more years.
It's very tough, and it will be difficult. That's not to say that we won't have any distillate that will all, there's been talks, and I've even discussed, because since my grandfather was a moonshiner and a majority of what he sold was unaged product, we've talked about maybe doing some kind of it would technically be white dog. I don't believe in really using the term moonshine. I don't believe there's a such thing as legal moonshine. That term literally means illegal. So I would call it some kind of white dog that we would offer as maybe a distillery exclusive or something like that to really pay tribute to what my grandfather was doing on that front. But in terms of aged product, we're just going to have to be patient and keep in mind that we have a reputation to uphold. That's what will help keep us patient.
Yeah, I think as long as that's in the future, it helps a little bit. I'm sure that
absolutely
that first release that's produced and distilled and bottled out of Alabama is going to be a pretty exciting day for you guys.
We'll be. I'm counting down the days already, so it's. I'm very excited about it. My ultimate goal with this distillery is I hope to transition and work my way into becoming the master distiller. That, of course, that's been the dream from day one. I feel like I'm not really a May unless I'm making whiskey. So I can't wait for the distillery to be up and running, and I can just get in and start getting my hands dirty and start, really working and building this brand and laying down liquid and getting it rocking and rolling.
Well, when that happens, you're going to have to come back on and talk with me about it. Cause
absolutely.
That's another one of those like dream jobs. You know what I mean? Like how cool would that be?
We'll do a live show from the distillery. We'll
Perfect.
Have you come in from Arizona, and you'll feel right at home because we have a lot of heat here too. So hot temperature. So,
all right, I want to talk some about this. So, this is my first time trying Clyde May's. I've never had it before. Not for any reason. I just haven't had it. And again, I've been kind of sipping on this while we've been talking. It's really good. First things first, I'm curious where it says Alabama style. Is that right? Is that in reference to anything specific, or is that more so in reference to your grandfather, or is that a specific style that is, unique to Alabama?
It's really, to answer your question, it's the first two. It's something that's unique to us because it was my grandfather's recipe. So while you have, Tennessee whiskeys and Kentucky bourbons, all of those have a set number of laws they have to follow to qualify. You know, I know everybody associates Tennessee whiskey with Jack Daniels, but there's a lot of other Tennessee whiskeys out there. And of course, there's God knows how many Kentucky bourbons out there. The term Alabama style is actually a term that's trademarked to us and to us only because it's my grandfather's recipe. And what Alabama style means, so obviously, as I mentioned to you, Clyde May, a majority of what he sold was unaged White Lightning moonshine. However, he actually took the time to age a lot of his moonshine into whiskey. And he didn't have the luxury of aging it for as long as we do today because he was doing it illegally. He was lucky if he could age it for a year. So he initially did it and initially tasted the finished product and was not happy with it. Because it didn't meet his standard. It had not aged long enough, but he knew the answer to him wasn't, hey, I got to age it longer, because he didn't have that kind of time when you're doing something illegally. Sure. So he had to figure out something to do to the actual product to make it taste better and smoother into his standards. So he tried several different things. It was very much a trial and error process, but he discovered through that trial and error process that adding a hint, not a lot, just a hint of oven-dried apple slices to the barrel at the very end of the aging process, not to flavor the whiskey, but to finish the whiskey, did just enough to take off some of that spice and burn. So what the term Alabama style means, we don't use actual oven-dried apple slices today. Another reason he did that, the oven-dried aspect would assist with the color and help it get more of that char color. We don't have that problem because we can age it for as long as we want. So we have a natural flavoring that we add at the very end of the aging process after it's been dumped and blended and everything like that. In fact, up until that point, it's a straight bourbon. But once we add, and we're only adding, I believe it's less than 0.5%. I believe that it's like 0.35% to this gigantic blend. Because keep in mind, when you blend barrels, you know, unless it's a small batch, you might be blending 60, 70, or even 100 barrels together to match your flavor profile. And we add less than 0.5% of that natural essence to the product to, you know, not only carry on my grandfather's legacy and to carry on his recipe, but also bring something unique to the market and to really make it a smooth product. So Alabama style is unique to Clyde May's. That's not to say that someone cannot make an Alabama whiskey. That's not to say someone cannot add a hint of apple to a whiskey. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying specifically the terminology or the phrase Alabama style is unique to us.
That's really cool. I did not know that. Okay, so do you guys have a straight bourbon, right?
We do, yes. So basically, which it is, we do blend different barrels. So even if this didn't have that hint of that natural essence, it's the two products would still be different. But the essentially speaking, the straight bourbon is the product without the Alabama style finish. We're most known. Now, granted, probably our best selling product nationwide is our straight bourbon because people know straight bourbon. You don't have to explain straight bourbon to people, whereas you do have to explain Alabama style to people. But a lot of people still, now I shouldn't say a lot of people, but there are people out there that get confused and think every product that says Clyde May's on it has that hint of apple or what, you know, it's only the ones that say Alabama style. If it doesn't say Alabama style, it just is what it says it is, rather it's a straight bourbon or a straight rye or whatever it may be.
Yeah. I mean, so it's interesting to me because I think that does get confusing probably for people where they would go with what they are accustomed to, like a straight bourbon, you know, it's at least 2 years. And so, you know, that's probably a very simple grab for somebody. But again, like the stories behind whiskeys, I think it's nice to know that and get that story out there and people understand that it's not like you said, it's not a flavored whiskey. It's finished. And those are so popular, obviously, right now, especially with some bourbons.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we even, technically speaking, we probably could put on the bottle something like straight bourbon with an Alabama style finish, and we're not calling it a bourbon or whatever. The whole debate with just like the wine finishes or whatever.
Yeah.
Technically, it's not a bourbon once you do that, but the reason they get around it is they say straight bourbon finished in this or finished with this or whatever. We wanted just something just completely unique. We didn't want to confuse people. And from that point of view, we wanted to say, hey, we want to be known. This was Clyde May's recipe. We wanted to stand on its own 2 feet, and we wanted to be known as, and we came up with, he never referred to what he was doing as Alabama style. That was something we came up with, that specific term. But you're right. It is easier for people just to gravitate towards the bourbon. And that's why I tell people, no matter what we produce, whether it's a bourbon or rye, no matter the finish, no matter the small batch, single barrel, the mash bill, the yeast, whatever it is, we have a standard we have to upkeep. And that's the greatest way we honor my grandfather, Clyde May, is matching his standard of excellence, regardless of what type of bourbon or what type of whiskey is inside the bottle. However, this original Alabama style whiskey, which the reason we call it original, that was the only product in our portfolio for many years. And we've expanded and added the bourbon, and we've added a rye whiskey, and now we have aged product as well. But this was the original. And, these kind of things don't happen overnight, and we know that. But part of our goal is to kind of introduce people not only to our bourbons and our rye whiskeys, which are things people know, but also introduce them to Alabama style and explain to them, hey, this is what that means. This is what this is,
Yeah, I think that's really cool. And I, just looking at the label itself, I mean, I think it's really cool. Like, you've got pictures of him with his name on it, and like,
right.
It's available since 1946, legal since 2001. I think it's, right. I mean, the label itself tells a great story. I mean, I think it's a really cool, added piece to it. It's not just something that's bland, that's just out there on a shelf. Like, there is a story behind this clearly. And again, coming from a moonshining background and then becoming legal, and especially in Alabama, having to wait till 2015, you said, to make it legal to distill it there. Like, it's a great story. And I think the label is a big part of that, personally.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about it earlier about what's important and what do you do to kind of rise above the clutter. And one thing I was I failed to mention and should have mentioned is because I'm big of what's inside the bottle is most important. Point blank, easiest question. But I'm also, and my CEO and this company, we're very big on packaging as well. We want the bottle to be able to tell a story, because for a lot of people out there, when they're shopping for a new whiskey or a new bourbon, it might be that packaging, that label that draws them into, because we don't all have, liquor stores where there's someone that can recommend something. You sometimes got to kind of have to go off what you read on the bottle. So packaging is very key, and it's important. However, you got to make sure that they like what's inside that bottle if you want to get a repeat customer. But packaging is very important, and I feel like we've done a great job of putting together a really nice label and telling a great story with all of our products.
Yeah, that packaging might get somebody to buy that first bottle, but the juice inside is going to get them to come back and buy another one.
Yeah, exactly.
So tell me, let's talk about this one in particularly. So it's a 85 proof, which I think is a nice, just able to sit down and sip on it. You're not talking your cask strength, which, very, very popular. I like some of them. But again, I don't always want to sit down and drink a 120 proof bourbon.
Right.
So yeah, tell me a little bit about this. What are we drinking here?
So it's like, as you mentioned, it's an 85 proof. It is a blend of 4 and 5 year old straight bourbon whiskeys. Of course, as I'm sure you know, with bourbon law, if you were to ask me, hey, how old it is, I got to quote the youngest barrel in the blend, so it would be 4 years old. However, there are 5 year old bourbons in this blend. And after it's been dumped and blended, right before it's bottled, we add that very, very small amount of natural essence to the batch to obviously carry on my grandfather's recipe and tradition. But the reason why he was doing that and the reason we also do it is to really take off some of that spice and burn, and to really create a smooth, unique product.
Yeah, I mean, it does. It's. I hate to use the word smooth most of the time,
Right.
unless it's actually smooth. Like
Right.
you can get some of those
Well,
high
it's
proofs and
yeah, you're absolutely right. Every whiskey, regardless of what it is, has some kind of burn to it. Especially to the
yeah,
someone who's not a whiskey or
yeah,
bourbon consumer. They're like, oh no, this still burns. But I guess what I mean with that is in relation to maybe other products of the same proof, or for what it is, it's very nice and very drinkable.
yeah.
Easy
Kind of
sipping.
takes the edge off a little bit.
Absolutely.
Because yes, and I'm with you there. Like it's a when I think smooth, I mean there's some really high proofs that are smooth. They don't
Right.
necessarily, like, you can taste the burn from the proof, or whether it's a rye spice or something like that. But it just kind of it really like calms it down, and it makes it very drinkable.
Absolutely.
Is this now? Is this one of the? Can you get into the mash bill on this or no?
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is so it's 75% corn, it's 21% rye, and it's 4% malted barley, which is a one of the more common MGP mash bills. However, the where we pull these barrels from and where we blend it is actually very unique in terms of, the way you proof down a whiskey, of course, is with water, but you can also get it to a certain proof by blending low and high proof products. So the way we blend this, and then of course with the finish, certainly makes it a unique product.
Yeah, this is delicious. I mean, that's I definitely could sip on this one. What is the price point on these typically?
So it's going to vary by market, as we mentioned earlier, with control states. And, but I will say in most markets, you'll find it around $30 or $31, but you may see it as high as $35 if you're in a control state, or a state that has a different price hike or different taxes. So I feel comfortable saying, depending on where you are, between $30 and $35.
I This is really good. I've never had it before. This is my first time trying it, and I really like this. I mean, it's definitely, caramely. It's definitely not like overbearing with the it's not super oaky, but it's definitely got a nice oak to it.
Yeah.
I really like this one. This is
Thank you. I
good.
appreciate it. Yeah. And it's, that's, I love for people to kind of sip before I explain Alabama style, because
Uh,
if you tell people like, hey, this has that natural essence of apple added, they're instantly thinking, oh, this is some kind
Apple.
of apple whiskey, and a lot of times, and we don't do it for flavor, we do it for finish. And my grandfather was a firm believer for the same reason. He was a believer, if I'm working so hard to make this product taste great on its own 2 feet, what's the point? And because you can make a bad product and over flavor it and disguise it as kind of a good product. So I like to let people taste and then explain, because a lot of times it's so subtle they can't even tell me what that finish is, because it's not an apple flavor or anything like that. It's just a finish that we do to carry on that recipe and also make a unique product.
Yeah, I like. I mean, you can definitely get the rye spice out of it. I mean, it's nice,
Yeah.
and there's definitely a spice to it that I think is really nice. I've personally gone to more high rye type bourbons.
Right.
I just really like them. I like I like that spice aspect to it. And I like how this thing I like how it lingers around as well. I really do.
We're big on rye as well, only because of course, or I'm not saying every moonshiner is like this. I'm speaking kind of from a outsider looking in point of view. A lot of people associate moonshine as corn whiskey, or
Mm-hmm.
they think corn when they think moonshine. Well, my grandfather actually used a good bit of rye when he was making his whiskey. He literally used to call rye a flavor grain. And you can talk to any master distiller now, and they'll say those exact same words. So my grandfather was a little ahead of his time, and, realizing that rye was more or less a flavor grain that brought something unique to the table.
I've never heard it said like that, but I think that's a really, I think it's a great point, because I don't feel like you get, I mean, unless something is a really, really high malted barley where you get like a, very specific cereal type grain to it.
Right.
I don't feel like you get a lot of, I mean, maybe a wheat that kind of doles it down, but I don't feel like it adds a flavor.
Right.
I don't know, but I like that. I mean, I think that's a great way to look at it.
With bourbon, of course, corn certainly has its own, you can tell the difference between high corn and low corn and stuff like that. But because corn has to be the dominant grain in a bourbon, what master distillers try to look for is, all right, what's that magic number of the either the rye or the wheat, if it's a wheated bourbon, that kind of can make it a unique, flavorful product. And so we don't necessarily, obviously there's some high rye bourbons that are, 40% rye or something like that. We feel like the amount of rye in this is a nice balance and a nice touch.
Yeah, I like it. I would definitely buy this one. I really like this a lot.
Thank you.
Especially on just a daily sipper. I mean, I think that's a great price point. I think the whiskey is good. Tell me a little bit about some of your other ones. I noticed a couple of bottles behind you, but tell me about some of the other bottles that you guys have.
Right. So we have what we kind of call our core three, which are everyday, readily available products in most markets, which would be the one that we tasted today, the original Alabama style whiskey, and then the straight bourbon. It's a 92 proof. It's a blend of 4 and 5 year old straight bourbons as well, non-chill filtered. And then we have a straight rye whiskey that's a 94 proof. It's a 4-year-old, and it's non-chill filtered as well. And then we start to kind of dive into the higher proofs. We try to have at least one product that appeals to every type of whiskey and bourbon drinker, whether you like the low proofs, high proofs, the mixable ones, whatever it may be. So after that rye whiskey, we have a 110 proof straight bourbon. It's a small batch. Currently, it's a 5-year-old, but it's almost 6 years old. It's 5 years, 10 months. But by bourbon law, you cannot round up. You can only round down. So we're actually, the next line of bottling of this batch that we're about to produce will actually be a 6-year-old, because it's going to hit the 6-year-old mark with that 110 proof straight bourbon. But we're also releasing this year a 13-year-old Alabama style cask strength whiskey, and then a 13-year-old cask strength straight bourbon. And then last but certainly not least, our oldest product to date, which is a 15-year-old straight bourbon. It is going to be high proof, but not cask strength. That's kind of the Clyde May's lineup. And we'll do single barrel projects and stuff like that as well. But in terms of, I don't want to say readily available, because the older age stuff is much more allocated, but stuff that are easier to locate would be the products I just listed off.
Is there distribution? I know you said that you guys are available in all 50 states. So some of those other ones that are a little bit more harder to come by, some of those allocated ones, are those available in like online, or is that something that they have
so depending on what state you live in, it can be something that you can find in, say, a Total Wine and More or something like that. However, we do use reservebar.com, and we give them a certain number of some of our allocated products to offer online to people who can legally have products shipped to their state. Otherwise, it's more of once it's gone kind of thing, like all allocated products. However, I'm a big believer in trying to help the consumer as much as possible. So that's why anytime I do any kind of tasting or anything like that, I leave all my business cards, and I'm like, hey, if you can't find a bottle, I'm not going to sit here and say I can get you one, but tell me where you live and I'll see if there's still one available somewhere close to you.
Sure.
So that's kind of how we operate with our allocated products.
Yeah, it's nice to have allocated stuff. I mean, you want to be able to find stuff that it's not always sitting on the shelf. I mean, those things
Absolutely.
are fun to come by.
Absolutely.
And sometimes it's it's nice to know you're trying something that's not out there just for everybody. That's definitely, I think, a fun part of this this bourbon rabbit hole that's out there.
Yeah, that's when we produced these older age products and blended these older age products, we didn't necessarily do it to say, hey, we want to have something that's impossible to get, but at the same time, it was we're literally offering everything that's available to us, and unfortunately that offering is just not as big as your everyday products. So we try, in a perfect world, we would love for everyone that wants a bottle to be able to get a bottle, but realistically it's there's always going to be someone that misses out. But that's why I try my best, was like, hey, it's coming back next year, let's give it another try.
Yeah, it's not always everywhere, but hopefully you get your hands on it and get to enjoy
absolutely
it.
Absolutely.
Where's a good place for people to find you guys on social media?
So we're on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. On Facebook and Instagram, it's just at Clyde May's Whiskey. On Twitter, it's Clyde May's at Clyde May's _. You can also go to our website, clydmays.com. We have a store locator where you can type in your zip code or just your city and where you're located, and it'll show all of the nearby liquor stores or bars and restaurants where you can find our product. Not necessarily any specific or particular product, but at least one of our products. So that's a good place to go to as well.
That's awesome. I think it's always good for people to be able to find a place to, run bottles down of something, especially social media. I think it's becoming huge. And we start to see people that are, I'll call them influencers, more or less, right, like in the bourbon whiskey community. And I think it's a really nice way for people to find bottles that maybe they've not seen or heard of, or maybe they've seen them but haven't tried them out yet. I think there's a lot of bottles that fall into that category. So I
couldn't agree more. It's I love the store locator aspect on our website, but at the same time, there's always some area where in a state where the closest bottle's 40 miles from you. So I will encourage anyone who may be listening, if there's not a bottle in a store close to you, go into your local store and request it, because we do have distribution in all 50 states, and all stores, if they want it, are able to get it. So if you want it, go in and ask for it, and we can make that happen for you.
Awesome. I'll definitely make sure to pass that along, because I think people would really enjoy this. So that's cool.
Well, I appreciate your time and, for listening to my ramblings for a little bit. And it means a lot to, be able to tell my grandfather's story and share his legacy. That's why I do what I do. So thank you very much for this. I greatly appreciate it.
I appreciate it too. I thank you for having this sent over my way. I'm excited. I got a chance to try it out, and it's definitely cool to hear the story coming from obviously your perspective with your family's name on this. And it's cool that you have people that are invested in it, obviously, to the extent that you are, with it being your family, but people who are excited to push this because they believe in the product as well. So that's really cool.
Absolutely. And
awesome.
When we get everything rocking and rolling in the distillery, come hang out with us too.
I'll be there. That sounds like a fun time. Awesome. LC, thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. Take care.